Hello everyone! Tonight we're going to float through the haze of cannon smoke and summer sweat. Drifting along the Danube River into one of Napoleon's strangest victories, the Battle of Wagram. It's 1809, and you're standing in a freshly trampled Austrian wheat field, your boots heavy with mud and memory, as fireflies flicker like ghostly lanterns and the guns have gone quiet for now. Somewhere across the dark river, tens of thousands of soldiers lie in wait. And you, my friend, are one of them? You probably won't survive this, and that's not even the scariest part. The scariest part, Napoleon doesn't look so sure anymore, so before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe. But only if you really like what I'm doing here. And I want to know, where are you watching from, and what time is it there? Drop it in the comments now. Turn down the lights, turn on the fan to some soothing background music, and enjoy your evening ride together. The grass is tall, the heat's rising from the fields, and the once invincible emperor of the French is pacing. It's late June 1809. The Danube gleams like a ribbon of fire in the sunset. You're camped near Vienna with Napoleon's Grande Armée, which sounds fancy until you realize it includes conscripts with barely 2 months of training. Men who were barbers or bakers a season ago. They're still wearing ill-fitting uniforms and pointing bayonets like they're toothpicks at a dinner party. But it's fine, probably. Only weeks earlier, in May, Napoleon had faced a reality that made his ego flinch. He lost. The Battle of Austernesling, his first real defeat in over a decade, left 20,000 French dead or wounded. And a half-sunken bridge his engineers are still having nightmares about. You remember that bridge? Half-logs rope, desperation, and a little prayer to whichever river god might spare you next time. Austrian artillery turned it into driftwood. Napoleon watched, silent for once, as men drowned trying to get across. The Austrians had pulled off the unthinkable, led by Archduke Charles, the cautious but capable brother of the Austrian emperor. They held their line, repelled the French, and lived to write smug letters home. Since then, weeks of eerie silence. You've been sitting here, sweating under your shako, polishing a musket you barely know how to reload, while across the river, Charles has been doing the exact same thing. Waiting Vienna is technically in French hands, but it might as well be made of paper MCH. The real fight is across the Danube, and both sides know it. The river is wide, the Austrians are alert, and the French, well, you've been rebuilding. Silently, ruthlessly. Napoleon's engineers, probably the most overworked people in Europe at this point, have been crafting a new plan, the island of Wagram. Remember the name, it's going to be your home, and maybe your grave's the linchpin. Napoleon is obsessed with detail. He has maps on maps, scouts in every farmhouse, and spies disguised as chimney sweeps. Probably, at one point, he spends an entire night rearranging an artillery battery, muttering something about the soul of battle being placement. Meanwhile, you're trying to find a tree to nap under that doesn't smell like horse. There's tension. In the air, not dread anticipation, like a theater crowd waiting for the curtain to rise. You can feel it in the rhythm of the drums during drills, in the new seriousness in Marshal Berthier's orders. In the slightly panicked way, junior officers reread their maps during supper. The storm is coming, and no one knows if it'll be over in an hour, or if you'll still be firing your musket by candlelight. Then something strange happens. Napoleon becomes quiet. He stops bragging. He starts walking alone more. You see him one evening, standing ankle-deep in the river, staring toward the Austrian lines, his hands behind his back, his bicorn hat pulled low like a man already in mourning. Historians are still debating whether Austernesling shook him or if he simply respected Charles more than he let on. What's certain is, he doesn't underestimate the Austrians anymore. He calls them clever little monks with cannons. It's a compliment, sort of. On July 1st, you're given 2 days of extra rations and a small handwritten letter for your family, just in case. One of the officers jokes, "Write slow." They won't read fast if it's bad news. Thanks, Lieutenant. The quiet of Lobau Island is deceptive. The birds chirp like it's springtime, and frogs croak in rhythm with the carpenter hammers echoing. Behind the tree lines, at night, you lie awake, hearing muffled wagon wheels and whispered commands in half a dozen languages. Over 100,000 French troops are gathering like ghosts behind reeds and under canvas. This is no blitz charge. This is a creeping thunderstorm. What makes it all even eerier is the food. Yes, the food rations suddenly improve. Salt pork is swapped for roast fowl. Bread arrives warm. Even a trickle of brandy makes it to your lips. It's the kind of feast generals offer before the bloodshed begins, and the weather blistering. July heat in the Danube Valley turns every soldier into a walking sweat rag. You tie a rag under your hat and hope you don't pass out mid-march. There's talk of heat stroke and hallucinations, but no one's listening. Everyone is focused on one thing, the crossing. And that's where this dream starts to turn into a sleepwalk on the edge of a nightmare. Napoleon's idea is to use Lobau Island as a springboard. Build multiple bridges, cross fast, hold the bank before the Austrians can react. It's bold, but not crazy unless you consider the part where half the bridges are made of boats lashed together with rope and ambition. And here's the odd bit. Many of the soldiers, including you, don't even know the full plan until the morning of July 4th. Napoleon's secrecy runs so deep that entire divisions are left guessing where they're marching until the sun's already up. One officer swears. He was told to walk toward the nearest thunder. Classic Dot. The tension snaps. Like a violin string that night. Orders arrive. You're crossing, no bugles, no torches, just the creak of wet wood and the slosh of water underfoot, and in the dark. As the bridge sways and the mist kisses your cheeks, you realize this is no longer just a battle. This is Napoleon's second audition for greatness. Was his first stumble, and Wagram is his chance to prove it was just a bad rehearsal. What you don't know is that the Austrians are watching. Quiet, patient, ready. You're still wiping sleep from your eyes when the first cannon thumps in the distance July 5th, just past dawn, and the Danube mist is rolling off the fields like spilled milk. But your boots are already muddy. Your pack is digging into your shoulders, and somewhere out there, hidden beyond dry grass and orchard walls, is the man Napoleon once considered a non-threat Archduke Charles of Austria. He's not exactly famous for personality. He's a little stiff, wears too much white, and walks like a man permanently bracing for a sneeze. But here's what makes him terrifying now he's learned. You see, Charles had faced Napoleon before, and he lost. A lot at Austerlitz, at UML, even when he had the numbers. But Charles has been doing something Napoleon's not great at. Adapting Charles. Starts hiring officers who disagree with him. He listens. He reorganizes the Austrian army using a model called the Kriegspiel, a kind of proto-war game that lets commanders simulate scenarios. It's not Fortnite, but it gives Austria something. Rare, predictive insight into how Napoleon might fight. And this time, he's built a force not to chase glory, but to survive Napoleon's storm. Austria's army is 140,000 strong, not elite, but not green. They've learned to maneuver faster, ditch old-school rigid formations, and finally stop relying entirely on cavalry charges and divine intervention. The Austrians even improve their artillery lighter faster, and they've chosen ground that favors them. Open farmland dotted with villages like Atterkla, Bomersdorf, and Wagram itself. And here's the real trick. Charles doesn't try to out-Napoleon. He creates a layered defense, one that can absorb pressure like a sponge. No one in Europe has successfully pulled this off yet. The French still think they're walking into the same old Austrians. They're not. You're not. The French plan is complex. Napoleon divides his army into wings, each tasked with flanking, fixing, or pressing forward, depending on where the Austrians give ground. But Charles sees it. He sees through it. He knows Napoleon will try to force a battle on open ground, then exploit the weakest point. So Charles does something bold. He invites Napoleon in. He leaves a tempting weakness in his center near Wagram village. It looks thin, fragile like one hard push, and it'll crack. But it's a baited snare behind that thin line. Reserves stacked like dominoes, batteries positioned just behind ridge lines. Infantry dug into trenches with overlapping fire arcs. It's not flashy, but it's functional. You, of course, don't see any of this. You're too busy trying not to trip over vineyards and stay in formation. But your officer mutters something odd. They want us to come. Never trust a silent line. As the sun rises higher, the French begin to feel something weird. The Austrians don't break. In some sectors, they even counterattack. One French brigade gets flanked, trying to chase down what looked like a fleeing unit only, to find themselves surrounded by Austrian grenadiers popping out of the wheat. One soldier later wrote, "It was like charging at shadows and hitting brick walls." Meanwhile, Napoleon is trying to read Charles's plan like a poker hand. But the problem is, Charles isn't bluffing anymore. He's stacking his chips, not folding dot. By midday, the French realize the Austrians aren't just holding there. Expanding, they've launched a surprise offensive on the French left, trying to roll it up before the French right can sweep around. It's smart, it's calculated, and it throws Napoleon completely off rhythm. Napoleon responds with his usual fury. He sends Murat's cavalry in a thundering countercharge. Sabers glinting, horses foaming, kicking up 1,000 clouds of dust. It looks dramatic, but it's disorganized. The Austrians absorb the charge, fall back just a little, then slam their artillery into the French flank. The battlefield becomes a furnace. You're crouched behind a low stone wall now, musket at... You're ready, and there's so much powder smoke you can't see the end of your own bayonet. Over the crash of cannon, you hear the shrill sound of fife and drum-mostrian units coordinating in tight rhythm like a deadly orchestra. One of your comrades whispers, "They practiced this. They actually practiced this." It's then that you notice something else. Napoleon is everywhere. He rides constantly, from sector to sector, hat low, coat open, issuing orders from horseback, waving with one gloved hand and writing dispatches with the other. But there's something new in his facet twitch, maybe a narrowing of the eyes, a faint realization that this time he doesn't control the tempo. One light-hearted officer mutters under his breath, "When your general rides more than your horses, that's a problem." By early evening, Charles decides to gamble. He orders a full frontal push against the French center, something Napoleon would never expect. It's risky, it exposes his flanks, but it's also psychological warfare, and it almost works. The French center buckles, panic spreads, some units start retreating. Napoleon sends in reinforcements, but the Austrian push continues like a battering ram wrapped in determination. Later historians will debate whether Charles should have pushed harder, whether Wagram might have been the second Waterloo 6 years early, but Charles hesitates just long enough. The French right stabilizes, and the daylight begins to fade by nightfall. The battlefield is a surreal painting, smoke hanging low, flames licking thatched rooftops. Bodies collapsed in the folds of earth like forgotten coats. You're exhausted, ears ringing, limbs shaking, but still alive. Just barely dot. And as you sit back against a scorched wagon, watching the stars blink overhead, you hear a whispered rumor float through camp. Charles has seen Napoleon and he's not afraid anymore. You're jolted awake just after midnight. No trumpet, no shouting, just a soft hand on your shoulder and the whispered words. It's time. There's dew on the grass, but you're already sweating. The heat hasn't left. It just went underground to fester in your boots. Around you, tens of thousands of men are moving like shadows through the dark. Weapons slung, boots muffled, officers murmuring final orders. No torches, no singing. Just the steady thump of soldiers' hearts and the great gamble of Napoleon's. Campaign now rests on a handful of wooden bridges, stitched together by engineers with calloused hands and caffeine for blood. This is the second crossing of the Danube. The one that has to work. The one that can't get blown up this time. Lobau. Island, your soggy little launching pad is now humming with energy. Behind the tree line, cannons are being rolled quietly into position. You can't see them, but you feel them, the way the earth trembles beneath their wheels. Ammunition carts creak, men cough into their sleeves. Someone to your right is muttering a prayer in Flemish, or maybe it's just his grocery list. Crossing the Danube in darkness would be hard for a dozen people. Napoleon's trying to move over 100,000. Historians still debate whether this was brilliance or madness. But here's what makes it legendary. It worked, thanks to a massive, mind-bending feat of logistics: new bridges, decoy movements, fake campfires, and a series of signal lanterns. Napoleon crosses the river virtually undetected. His plan is to establish a strong beachhead on the far side, then expand fast before the Austrians can throw a punch. But, the river doesn't care about plans. As you step onto the first bridge, the wood groans under your weight. Water sloshes beneath. One French corporal tells you not to look down, then does immediately, and pukes. The bridge sways like a lullaby gone wrong. You grip your musket tighter and shuffle forward. The air smells like wet rope, gun oil, and nervous ambition. It's not smooth. A section of the pontoon bridge drifts loose, and for a moment, an entire battalion halts while engineers leap barefoot into the water, ropes in their teeth, trying to pull it back in place before dawn. The Austrians must have been asleep or else decided to let you get far enough in that there's no turning back. You make it to the northern bank just before sunrise. It's strangely quiet. No drums, no shouts, just the soft wind through tall crops and a broken barn owl call in the distance. You collapse behind a low ridge, muscles twitching from fatigue, ears still echoing the creak of bridge ropes. All around you, men crouch silently, eyes wide, waiting for the moment when everything shifts from sneaking to smashing. The sun peaks up, and the Austrians open fire. Artillery thunder erupts from the ridgelines across the field, and you hit the dirt as chunks of earth blast skyward. They saw you, or they guessed. Either way, you're in it now. Napoleon races to stabilize the forward positions. Orders are fired off like musket balls. Cavalry regiments are told to wheel right. Infantry divisions to dig in. You're handed a shovel and told quite helpfully, if you don't dig, you die. The Austrian cannons are terrifying, but they're not coordinated yet. Charles hadn't expected the French to move this fast, and now he's playing catch-up. Still, you've got maybe 10 minutes before his infantry starts descending like a tide. Napoleon's first move, artillery, always. The French Grand Battery roars to life massive guns arranged in a wall of fire that tears into Austrian forward positions. It's like waking up in a thunderstorm with metal teeth. The Austrians flinch, slow down, give you just enough space to breathe in, to build a better line. And here's the weird part. You're seeing Napoleon adjust. Not command from the clouds, but pivot in real time. He begins shifting troops, not by textbook, but by feel. Some battalions are moved using handwritten notes passed by horseback. Others get repositioned because he rides over himself to check. The ground, he dismounts twice to look at the terrain on foot knees, deep in field mud, peering through a spyglass. Like a man trying to read the soul of the battlefield, but not everything goes to plan. The French left flank, under Messina, is bogged down. Thick crops, heavy heat, and Austrian skirmishers slow progress. Some soldiers get lost in the early morning haze and walk directly into enemy pickets. You're one of them. Oops. You manage to avoid capture thanks to the dumbest stroke of luck. The Austrian patrol chasing you runs out of ammo and breath. You double back, fall into your unit, and swear not to tell anyone how close you came to being bayoneted because you thought that tree looked familiar. Classic. The real blow comes when Napoleon realizes his right flank, led by Devout, is too far off course, the ground is rougher than expected, and Austrian resistance is fierce. The French center, instead of advancing together, begins to drift apart, like dancers losing the rhythm. The army isn't falling apart, but it's wobbling. Napoleon rides to the center. The heat's climbing past 90 degrees, and you can see the sweat staining even his immaculate coat. He's furious, inspired, exhausted, and then dash-focused with his spyglass in hand. He watches Charles shift reserves toward the right, trying to hammer Devout before he stabilizes. That's when Napoleon sees his chance. "We punch through the center," he growls. "Everything else will fall." You hear it pass down the line like gospel dot. So begins the plan that will define the second day of Battleland, a loud assault on the Austrian center. But that's for tomorrow. For now, you collapse behind your knapsack, the smell of smoke in your hair, the buzz of mosquitoes in your ears, and a crust of stale biscuit in your mouth. You made it across the river. You're still breathing, but something's different. For the first time, you wonder if Napoleon might actually lose, not because he's weaker, but because his enemy is finally worthy. July 6th, 1809. Dawn doesn't break so much as melt across the sky. You're squinting into the sunrise, wondering whether the red hue is natural or just another side effect of burning Austrian haystacks. The battlefield smells like smoke, sweat, gunpowder, and whatever was in that soup you had last night that probably wasn't beef. Today is the day. You're smack in the middle of the Battle of Wagram. Engagement so massive, so chaotic, It feels like someone dropped all of Europe into a blender and hit puree, and it's already going sideways. Napoleon wakes early, dresses meticulously as always, and eats barely a crust of bread. He looks calm, maybe too calm. You know that face. That's the same face he had before the Battle of Austerlitz, except then he was smiling. Now he's calculating. He knows what he's up against. The Austrian army has dug in across a 7-mile front. It's not elegant, but it's functional, like an angry porcupine. Charles has reshuffled his troops overnight, moving reserves quietly, and reinforcing his artillery along key ridges. He's even linked his flanks better. The center, which Napoleon plans to hammer, is no longer Holowitz-baited steel, but Napoleon's out of time. The Austrians are already advancing on the French right. If he waits, they'll roll up his entire flank. So he goes all in. Enter Marshal Macdonald. Yes, Etienne Macdonald, man famous for his loyalty, his stubbornness, and his jawline. Napoleon turns to him and says something dramatic like, "Break them, and you break the war." Macdonald nods, says something French and noble-sounding, and gets to work organizing one of the most audacious attacks of the Napoleonic Wars, a gigantic assault column. This isn't a column like you've seen before. No sleek lines, no dainty marches. This is a block of doom 8,000 men, packed shoulder to shoulder in a rectangle, 3 rows deep, with cannons bolted on either end. Think of a marching fortress. Think of a battering ram made of people. Historians still debate whether this was tactical genius or sheer desperation. Probably both. You're not in Macdonald's column, lucky. But you see it pass a rolling tide of boots, bayonets, and bugles. Men chanting songs that sound like prayers. Officers walking sideways, yelling in all directions. It's mesmerizing. Then the Austrians open fire. It's like the earth splits in half. The column is blasted with grape shot and shrapnel from 3 sides. Entire rows vanish. The smell of scorched fabric and bone fills the air. Horses panic. Drummers vanish mid-beat. The Austrian gunners are locked in, and Charles is watching from a distant rise, his white-gloved hand pointing like a chess master, saying, "Check." You, meanwhile, are crouched behind a patch of churned-up earth, holding your musket with slippery fingers. Whispering through gritted teeth, this wasn't in the recruitment pamphlet. Macdonald doesn't break. He doesn't waver. He plows forward, limping, bloody, still screaming orders. His column reaches the Austrian center, what's left of it anyway, and nearly punches through, but they don't have support. The flanks are late. The rest of the French line is still reeling from surprise Austrian counterattacks along the ridge at Atticla. For a moment, it looks like everything will collapse, and then the French cannons speak. Napoleon unleashes Messina's reserve artillery, ordering a concentrated barrage that flattens the Austrian advance like a rolling pin over biscuits. The earth shudders. The dust thickens. You can't hear your own breath. Napoleon rides forward himself, placing batteries with his own hand, waving reinforcements into the breach. His staff begs him to stay back, but he's not having it. If this army falls, I fall with it. Classic Napoleon. Half poetry, half nonsense, but it works. French morale stabilizes. Macdonald's battered column holds just long enough for Devout to finally get the right flank moving again. And once Devout enters the fray, it's like watching a conductor retake his orchestra. The French right begins rolling, crushing Austrian units like cardboard. You're now back in the center, tasked with holding a battered village that no longer has a name. The walls are pocked with musket balls, the fountain is gone, and the bakery has become a makeshift medic tent full of screams and confusion. And yet, the Austrians begin to retreat. Charles, seeing that his center is about to crack and his reserves are spent, signals the withdrawal. He's not defeated, just outplayed for now. The Austrians retreat in decent order, their banners still flying, their artillery mostly intact. You expect cheers, there aren't any. The field is too quiet. You step over the fallen friends, enemies, men who yesterday joked about going home and now lie still in the wheat. Flies buzz. A torn tricolor flutters on a broken pole. You find a discarded violin still whole, lying beside a soldier who never got to play it. Napoleon walks the field slowly, his boots leaving dry impressions in the ash. A marshal rides up and says, "Sire, we have victory." Napoleon doesn't smile. He just says, "At what price?" Because here's the oddest detail of all: he doesn't pursue the Austrians. No grand chase, no encore. Why? Because his men are spent, his generals are frayed, his bridges are still shaky, and most of all, he knows. This isn't 1805 anymore. This enemy won't just roll over. Charles may have lost Wagram, but he preserved his army, and in the long game of empires, that means everything. As the sun sets over the scorched plain, you sit quietly with what's left of your unit. One man is whittling, another is praying. You're just staring. Napoleon won, but something in your bones whispers he's not the same. The fires are dying out. Not the fires of war that once still smoldering, but the literal ones. You're lying beneath the stars now, somewhere near Wagram's battered crossroads, and for the first time in days, no one is barking orders. The breeze is soft, the gun smoke is thin, and even the horses seem to be sighing. Victory came. It marched in on broken legs and whispered, not shouted. The next morning, Napoleon's orders are short and tight. The Austrians have retreated. They've left behind some guns, a few thousand prisoners, and a battlefield soaked in stories no one wants to repeat. But they didn't shatter, they didn't break. And that's different. You're used to Napoleon's victories coming with dramatic flourishes, chased enemies, parades, treaties signed in glittering palaces. But this feels like punching your own reflection in a mirror. The enemy was your equal, same size, same confidence, maybe even the same bad knees. That's what Archduke Charles was to Napoleon, and Napoleon knows it. He doesn't celebrate, there's no speech from the saddle, no grand announcement to the troops. He simply returns to his tent and starts writing dispatches. One of the aides says he scribbled until sunrise. Letters to Paris, to Josephine, to the Austrian court. Later, he writes a message to the Austrian emperor. Not a threat, a peace offer. Let that sink in. After Wagram, the so-called master of Europe doesn't demand total surrender. He doesn't burn cities or redraw borders with arrogance. Instead, he sues for peace and gets it. A few weeks later, the Treaty of Schönbrunn is signed. Austria gives up territory, sure, but it's not humiliated. Its army lives to fight another day. And Charles, he steps down. Not in disgrace, just ... done. He'd faced Napoleon at full tilt, looked into the eye of the empire, and said, enough. Historians are still divided on what Wagram really meant. Some say it was the last great tactical success of Napoleon's early, still a masterpiece of flexibility under pressure. Others call it the beginning of the end. A win that tasted like loss. Because the truth is, the cracks were starting to show. The Grande Armée had grown too big, too dependent on quantity over quality. Some of the conscripts barely knew how to fire a musket. Supplies were slow, morale was thinning, and the spark, the magic that made battles like Austerlitz feel like destiny. It flickered at Wagram. Napoleon still had his genius. But genius isn't always enough when the enemy learns your tricks. And here's where your story slows. You survive. Somehow, you get patched up in a tent filled with laughter and bandages. The surgeon is drunk. The bandages smell like vinegar, and someone keeps playing a harmonica off-key. But you're alive. Your unit is reassigned. Your uniform patched. You pass through Vienna again, this time noticing how few windows are still intact. The people don't cheer. They don't spit either. They just nod, tired. Used to it, Napoleon leaves Austria weeks later. Not in disgrace, but not with fireworks either. He returns to France not to triumph, but to plan. And you keep marching. Towards Spain, maybe. Or toward the Russian frontier. Rumors are already starting. But you remember Wagram. You remember the fog over the Danube, the silence before the cannons, the way Macdonald's men marched into fire and didn't turn back. And you remember that for one day, Napoleon wasn't a god of war. He was just a man sweating under his coat, trying to guess what his opponent would do next. You never forget that. Years later, when the empire truly begins to fall, when the eagles are torn down and Paris is occupied, you still think back to Wagram, not because it was glorious, because it was honest, a mirror, not a banner. So tonight, as you drift off to sleep, remember this: even the greatest victories can carry quiet warnings. Even the most brilliant minds can be surprised, and sometimes the hardest battles aren't the ones you lose, but the ones you barely win. Close your eyes now. The cannons are quiet. The bridges have held. The night is finally cool. You're safe. You're home, and the Danube wide, tired, and silver keeps flowing forever. Tonight, we traveled to the banks of the Danube River in 1809, where the legendary Napoleon Bonaparte faced not just an enemy army, but a version of himself in the calm, calculated Archduke Charles. We witnessed how Austria, once a constant victim of Napoleon's lightning campaigns, learned from its defeats, adjusted its strategy, and pushed the French war machine to its limits. The Battle of Wagram, told through your eyes as a tired French soldier, wasn't just about maneuvers and maps. It was about fear, exhaustion, determination, and the creeping sense that the emperor might no longer be untouchable. Quiet of Lobau Island to the massive collision of armies in the heat and dust, Wagram proved that victories can be fragile, and legends even Napoleon's can wobble, through humor, detail, and late-night introspection. We've lived the battle not just as history, but as experience. Now, as the world outside grows quiet, remember you've been through the smoke, the bridge crossings, and the silence after. You've seen the mirror of ambition. You've heard the hush of history.